Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's going to take three. Good afternoon. Thank you. Welcome to Lunch with Books. First order of business. Does this belong to anyone in the room here? It's a green car key with a. Okay. Yeah, it looks like a pretty old car. Okay, lost and found. So if you wouldn't mind turning off your cell phones, and really, even if you do mind, I'd prefer you did turn them off. I have to start with something sad. Our friend, Dr. Yassini, who always sat over there, has passed away, and we're going to dedicate the program to him today. I've been here a long time, and he was always here. He was a really dedicated patron of this program. So we'll miss him. This Thursday at 7, the People's University Marine Biology, Dick Smosna and Kathy Bruner, they're both retired geologists and oceanographers from WVU, and their course, they have two of them. They will be here in person. We've done a lot of Zoom with that. But it's called The Amazing Ocean Realm. So they'll just be talking about life in the ocean. And then next Tuesday, on the 31st of March, Andrew Welsh Huggins, who is the author of the Shamus Award-winning, Shamus Award-nominated Andy Hayes Private Eye series. His new book is called The Mailman, and that'll be the 31st. So, our guest today was scheduled a few months ago, but because of the parking lot work, we thought we were going to close the library, and I had to cancel the program, regrettably. But she was gracious enough to come back. And here she is. Jessica Whitehead is a writer and curator of collections at the Kentucky Derby Museum in Louisville, Kentucky, co-author of The History of the Kentucky Derby in 75 Objects, and a contributor to the watercolors of Harlan Hubbard from the collection of Bill and Flo Cadell. Her new book, she has here copies for you, is called Driftwood, The Life of Harlan Hubbard. Please welcome Jessica Whitehead.
All right. Can you all hear me okay? Excellent. That's great. Well, I am thrilled to be here. This is my childhood library. So I grew up here in Wheeling, West Virginia. My parents are right over there. So it's really So it's really thrilling to be back here in Wheeling to give this program, especially because this is a story about the Ohio River. So many of you may not have heard of Harlan Hubbard before. In fact, I'm going to ask you, how many of you has heard of Harlan Hubbard before? Okay, more than I expected, which is great. So you're holding it down. Harlan Hubbard is an artist, he's a writer, he's a sustainability pioneer, an incredible figure who is mostly known in Kentucky history. And so right now, as you heard, I live in Indiana, right across the river from Louisville, Kentucky. And so there, Harlan Hubbard's pretty much a household name. But as soon as you get out of Kentucky, even when you get out into the farther flung areas of Kentucky from central Kentucky, people start going, Harlan who? And so I wanted to give a little context for those of you who may or may not be familiar with Louisville. How many people have been to Louisville? Oh, good. How many people have been to Cincinnati? Oh, yeah. All right. So, Louisville, Cincinnati, we're going to be talking mostly about a place right here called Madison, Indiana. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the northern Kentucky towns that are right in Kentucky across from Cincinnati. So just to sort of orient you to where this story is. But above all, this is an Ohio River story. And I'm an Ohio River girl. So sorry, everybody. Sorry, parents. But these are my parents and me standing before a beautiful view of the Ohio River. This is an overlook at the college where I attended college in southern Indiana called Hanover College. And it has this beautiful view of the river looking down toward Kentucky. And this place is called The Point. And this is sort of ubiquitous in the imaginations of people who graduate from Hanover or who live in this area, this beautiful view of the river. You can probably tell I was probably pretty bookish when I was younger. So when I was in college, I was in the library a lot. And behind the circulation desk at the library at Hanover College, where I went to school, this painting hung behind the circulation desk. And it's a beautiful landscape of that river curving that beautiful view from the campus. And I felt drawn to it for many reasons. It's a very beautiful view. It has wonderful composition that draws you forward. But I felt so drawn to this painting long before I ever knew who the person was who had painted this, who had signed his name down at the bottom, Harlan Hubbard, in red paint. So long before I ever knew anything about Harlan, I was drawn into this painting. And we're going to come back to this painting at the end because it's important to the story. But first, where we're going to start is why this book is called Driftwood. This is a biography of this man, Harlan Hubbard. And Driftwood was actually the original title of his breakout book. His breakout book was a book called Shanty Boat. How many people have read the book Shanty Boat? All right. So we'll talk a little bit about Shanty Boat. Mark Harshman has a copy of Shanty Boat sitting back there. But his original title for Shanty Boat was actually Driftwood. And he wanted to call it Driftwood because he uses the idea of driftwood, the theme of driftwood, the concept of driftwood as a metaphor for transformation, a metaphor for his own life. And I wanted to really pay homage to that. And even in the beginning lines of his book, which was later called Shanty Boat, he says, "A river tugs at whatever is within reach, trying to set it afloat and carry it downstream. Living trees are undermined and washed away. No piece of driftwood is safe, though stranded high up the bank. The river will rise to it, and away it will go." And so in his life, Harlan Hubbard uses this idea of driftwood as a metaphor for travel, as a metaphor for transformation. Think about a tree limb that is dropped off a living tree, falls into the river. We've seen that a whole lot in recent years, right, with the Ohio River. And slowly, by the forces of water, by the forces of travel, by the forces of time, is transformed into these crazy pieces of driftwood that we see everywhere during flood season especially. So much more unique and different than it started. And that's what this story is. It's a story of transformation. Harlan Hubbard, when we meet him at the beginning of this biography, we meet him, and it's interesting, you all just had your 90th anniversary, I think, of the 1936 flood, right, that devastated Wheeling and this region. Down in Louisville, that area, ours was 1937, early 1937. And I actually opened this book on the historic 1937 flood. And Harlan Hubbard is looking out over the 1937 flood. And he's looking at all of this driftwood that's floating. And he's thinking about floods, he's thinking about driftwood, and he says, "I need a flood in my soul to wash away all the old drift and the flimsy habits in order to renew his life." Because in 1937, Harlan Hubbard was 37, feeling very disaffected with his life, which we'll talk about why. And it's sort of a turning point for him because he writes in his journal not long after that, "What great event in my life am I waiting for?" And we'll learn what that great event is too. But first, we'll go back to the beginning. I mentioned that Harlan's story happens mainly in the area around Madison, Indiana, and Milton, Kentucky, which is sort of right in between Cincinnati and Louisville on the Ohio River, and in this little string of towns in northern Kentucky right across from Cincinnati. So some of you may have been to Covington, Kentucky. Some of you may have been to Fort Thomas, Kentucky. There's also Bellevue, Kentucky, and Bellevue, Kentucky is this little town where Harlan Hubbard was born. And incidentally, he was born January 4th, 1900. And any of you who likes to read history just loves when someone is born in 1900, right? Because you never have to do math to find out how old someone is. But he was born January 4th, 1900, to these two folks, these sort of dour-looking folks. This is Frank Gilbert Hubbard and Rose Ann Swingle. And Frank Gilbert Hubbard had a very he was sort of a hobbyist tinkerer. He didn't really care much about ambition. He didn't care much about money. He was very interested in just creating things, even if they didn't really take him anywhere or do anything magnificent for his life. Rose Swingle was very ambitious. She was very driven. We're not quite sure why they got married because they weren't terribly well suited. But Rose Ann Swingle, soon to be Hubbard, actually had been in the 1880s and the 1890s a typesetter for the Champaign Daily Gazette in Champaign, Illinois. She was a working woman way before there were many working women. But she stopped working when she met Frank. The two of them got married, and they had 3 kids. These are their 3 beautiful boys, very handsome young men. The first is their eldest. This is Frank Jr. Frank, we'll talk a lot about Frank in this presentation. The middle, his name is Lucian. His name's Louis. They call him Louis in their family. And of course, the last is little baby Harlan Hubbard, holding his little tin horn. This is on his birthday in 1904, so Harlan Hubbard is, hey, all right. So these 3 boys, these were all taken around 1904, so you can see how much older Harlan Hubbard's brothers were than him when he came along. There were some miscarriages in there for Rose that we think accounted for this big gap in their ages. But this big gap in their ages ultimately sort of led to Frank and Louis being sort of surrogate father figures for Harlan. And certainly, Frank and Louis were already very well along the way in understanding who who they were, what their characters were, what they were interested in. Frank, the eldest, was an artist. He had studied at the Ohio Mechanics Institute in Cincinnati. He was studying to do technical drawing and illustration. So very different kind of artwork than his brother would eventually do. But Frank was interested in art. Louis wanted to be a writer. So Frank interested in art, Louis interested in writing. It makes sense that Harlan would then develop interests in both of those and do both of those very well. But they also, of course, instilled in Harlan lots of the skills and lots of the interests that he would carry on for the rest of his life. This wonderful drawing here, done in 1906, Harlan Hubbard was 6. This drawing done in 1906 is actually by his brother, Frank Hubbard, and it's of Harlan learning to draw. Frank was effectively Harlan's first art teacher, and that relationship, they were best friends for their entire life, but that relationship of sort of an artist, compatriot, carried on through their entire life too. But you can see how young Harlan was when he was starting to learn how to draw. Louis and Frank also, like any self-respecting young boys or girls growing up along the Ohio River, loved to be out on the river, loved to be in the Ohio River, loved to be around the Ohio River, just adventuring and doing, exploring, doing things that boys and girls do on the water. You'll note that this middle photo says "Our Canoe." That was, in fact, a canoe that Harlan watched his elder brothers build. Harlan Hubbard would ultimately become a boat builder himself. So very early on in his life, he's also getting all of this really fascinating information about how to build a boat, how to build a canoe, how to paddle a canoe. And actually, in the 1970s, Frank wrote a really wonderful letter to his brother Harlan, where he said, "You came to love the Ohio River when you were no taller than our canoe paddle," which I thought was a really lovely little phrase. And of course, we see on the last image the tip of their canoe and looking at some Ohio River shanty boats. You've already heard that Harlan's breakout book was called Shanty Boat, so we're going to be talking about shanty boats and shanty boat culture a little bit. But that's a tantalizing little clue of what Harlan would have been growing up around as living along the Ohio River in the early 1900s. But in 1904, Harlan Hubbard's father, and all the boys' father, Frank Sr., passes away. He had been working as a paint salesman, and he couldn't really hack it as a salesman, so he was working as just sort of a house painter for a while. They think he died from complications with lead poisoning, very unfortunate. But Frank Sr. dies, and this obviously causes a lot of issues for Rose, his wife, and her 3 children, particularly her youngest child, Harlan, and her. Fortunately, both Frank and Louie, because they were older, had already started their careers. They were doing really well in their careers by the time Rose really needed the support after her husband passed away. Frank, I mentioned, was doing illustration. And so he was doing that in newspapers in Cincinnati. He was doing technical drawing for all kinds of companies. And Louis, in 1912, received an offer to work as the night editor for the New York Times. And so Louis said, "Bye-bye, Kentucky, I'm going to New York." And so Louis goes to New York, and soon the rest of the family follows them. So this is a Kentucky story, mainly, but it's also a broader story because there's this interlude in Harlan's formative years that he's spending in the hub of American culture at that time, and we'll talk about why that matters. Frank, of course, follows because he's hearing all those good things that are happening with illustration opportunities on Madison Avenue for ad agencies. So who's seen Mad Men? Frank was a madman. He was one of those early illustrators for lots of companies and lots of places on Madison Avenue in the 19-teens and 1920s. So Frank and Louis are settled in New York. Harlan and Rose follow in 1915. And Harlan enrolls in school. They all settle in the Bronx, in the Tremont section of the Bronx, so where Grand Concourse is. And they all settle there, sort of in walking distance from one another. And this is a really exciting time for Harlan because, you know, he's 15. He's coming to this amazing big city with all of these cultural opportunities, which we'll talk about, but also he's got new rivers to explore. You know, he knew the Ohio River like the back of his hand, but now he has the Harlem River, he has the East River, he has all of these amazing rivers, the Hudson River. He has all of these amazing rivers to explore, and he does. And this is a really exciting time for that sort of natural exploration of that new landscape. But he also is spending a lot of time with, this is his brother Frank, again, around this period, and this is Frank's new wife, Frances. So Frank and Frances become very important in Harlan's sort of cultural education while he's in New York, because they thought that he was sort of the bee's knees. He was very precocious as a student, so he was making good grades, but he also had just sort of this boundless creative energy and this boundless interest in all kinds of different things. And so they wanted to encourage that and foster that. So they would take him out, of course, to see the great Western and Eastern canons of world art at places like the Metropolitan. But he would also be going, this is, you know, the 1915, 1916, 1917, this is just when that newfangled thing called modernism is coming around and sweeping the American art world and really rankling a lot of people. But this was an exciting time when you could go to sort of avant-garde galleries and you could see people like Georgia O'Keeffe and John Marin, and these amazing artists, Marsden Hartley, these amazing artists who were creating sort of on the fringes, who were doing amazing work in landscape that was combining landscape painting, traditional landscape painting, and combining that with this modernistic edge. Harlan would have been going to see some of these shows early on. So he was getting this incredible cultural education through art. He was getting the opportunity to go hear concerts, go to the opera, go to the symphony. He had a lifelong love of classical music, which we'll hear about a little bit. And that was all facilitated by Frank and Frances. So they had a really close relationship. But you're hearing me talk about 1916, 1917, 1918, and you're thinking, hey, this is World War I. What's going on with that? World War I did affect Harlan Hubbard. He was still too young for the draft by the time things started, but he did end up getting involved in a new program that New York State instituted, and this was called the Farm Cadet Service. And the Farm Cadet Service was an opportunity for really high-achieving young men living in New York City to go up to upstate New York and to help fill in the agricultural sector for all of the young men who had been sent to Europe to fight in World War I. So this was an opportunity to serve your country through helping feed the country, helping support that important part of American culture. So Harlan did this for 2 summers. He did this in 1917 and 1918. And this was really formative for him because he was working with these German immigrant families who were still they weren't working with mechanized farm machinery. That was redundant. They weren't working with mechanized farm implements. They were still using hand tools. So Harlan got to know how to use things like a scythe. Who knows how to use a scythe here? Yeah, all right. Not many. Using things that are not mechanized to handle large amounts of crops. So this is something that will come to play in his later life. So he's learning these important tools. He's learning how to plant crops. He's learning how to harvest crops. So this is very formative for that reason. It's also formative because while he's in upstate New York, he wanders into a library near Cornell and plucks a little volume off the shelf called Walden, Henry David Thoreau's Walden. Walden, of course, transcendentalist masterpiece, simplify. That ethos would change Harlan's life. And ultimately, everything that he would do from that point on, from reading Walden, would have Thoreau sort of ringing in the back of his head. At the end of his farm cadet experience in upstate New York, one of my favorite finds that I found, I'm a history nerd, I'm an archives nerd. I like going into archives and seeing these manuscripts. One of the most exciting pieces I found is this piece that you see on the screen, and it's reproduced in full in the book if you're interested in reading the whole thing. But this is a culminating essay that was required by the Farm Cadet Service for these young men to write about their experience in upstate New York working in agriculture, that was required to get school credit for having done this program. And this is Harlan's culminating essay from 1918. This was not listed in the finding aid for this archive. The Farm Cadet Service archives are held at the New York State Archives, and I didn't see it in anything related to Harlan in the finding aid, and I ended up, this is why you always email the archivist, because I emailed the archivist and I said, by chance, do you have anything related to Harlan Hubbard? And this showed up in my inbox 2 days later. But what's so special about this is the oldest composition that we have, formal composition that we have from Harlan Hubbard, 1918, and already his handwriting obviously is very familiar to me because I've been reading his letters and journals for years and years and years. So I recognize his handwriting, but I also recognize a lot of his poetry, a lot of his use of language, a lot of the way that he constructs sentences is already evident in this essay. And it's really special to see this very formative piece from this very formative time. So after the farm cadet service, Harlan graduates high school, and I mentioned that Frank was his art buddy. His brother Frank was his art buddy. And Frank loved the fact that he had another artist in the family, and he doted on Harlan. He would buy him sketchbooks and really expensive art supplies to sort of encourage him to keep following this, what initially Harlan thought might be a hobby, but Frank wanted to become a career. And so Harlan wasn't quite sure what he wanted to do after he graduated high school, and Frank said, why don't you go to art school, see if you like it? And so Harlan enrolls in the National Academy of Design in New York. And the National Academy, founded by the famous Hudson River School artists like Thomas Cole, this National Academy was very conservative, okay? So there were other art schools in New York, like the Art Students League, that were absolutely working with this new modernistic hotshot stuff that was coming over from Europe and was much more progressive, much more interested in pushing the boundaries. The National Academy of Design was very traditional in their education. And so basically what Harlan did for his entire first year in art school was draw plaster casts, sketch busts of Nero, and that wasn't terribly exciting. So Frank tried to supplement his more traditional education with teaching him to paint. And so Frank, of course, his first drawing instructor, also his first painting instructor. These are Harlan's very first works in watercolor. You see this lovely little cyclamen in a pot that Harlan did in watercolor. Watercolor would become very important in Harlan's work. And you also see this very sweet oil painting, Harlan's very first oil painting. Both of these done under the tutelage of his brother Frank. So Frank is essential to his development as an artist. Incidentally, this little still life is called Carrot, Onion, and Tin Can. It's very literal. But I've had many people say to me, that's not a carrot, that's a rutabaga. And, I be that as it may, carrot. So, Harlan is having this incredible experience in New York. But Rose, his mother, who was sort of the drill sergeant, if you're not picking that up, she was sort of the drill sergeant for the Hubbard family, and certainly the drill sergeant for Harlan as the youngest boy. Rose was growing very tired of New York. Both Louis and Frank had married. They had their own children. They had these lives that they were developing outside of her life, and she didn't feel very needed anymore. She wanted to return to Kentucky. She wanted to return to her friends and this landscape she knew. And Harlan writes in his journal at this time, it was taken for granted that I would go with her. So in 1923, they go back and forth a little bit in the intervening years, but in 1923 they formally move back to Kentucky from New York. And this is a really challenging time for Harlan because I like to do the thought experiment of what kind of Harlan Hubbard would we have seen if he had stayed in New York City during this incredible time? What would his art look like? What would he have started writing? What would he be? But he did come back to Kentucky, and he starts reading a lot of Thoreau. And of course, one of Thoreau's most famous lines, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." I think he recognized that he was living his own moment of quiet desperation. But while he's in this period returning to Kentucky, he's still trying to find his voice as an artist because he's decided now, okay, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to be a landscape painter. This is what I want to do. And in this period, he's experimenting wildly. These paintings happened within a couple months of each other. So one of them, much more realistic, a little bit expressionistic, like Albert Pinkham Ryder, very dark, brooding. And then the other clearly inspired by Monet and the Impressionists. He's playing with all kinds of different styles because he's not quite sure who he is yet. He's not quite sure what his voice is. But he also recognized that he was not quite skilled enough, he didn't have that artistic voice to be able to support a full career as an artist just yet. So it was assumed by Rose, his mother, that he would be the breadwinner for the family. So he had to support his mother, and he had to support himself. So he decided to start working construction. And so he worked construction for many, many years, almost 2 decades, on and off, while he's trying to establish a painting career, supporting his mother. During this period, this is a great picture of him at a working site. During this period, he's learning other really important skills that are going to become very important to him later on in life, which we'll talk about. So he's learning masonry. He's learning bricklaying. He's learning framing. He's learning basic plumbing, basic electric. He's learning really important things that he will definitely apply later on in life. But he applies it first in his personal life with this house that you're seeing here on the screen. This is still standing. This was built in 1923. This is Harlan Hubbard's first solo structure that he designed. And he designed it for his mom. They had been living in just sort of rented apartments. And he said, "Mom, I think I've got enough years in my tool belt here that I can build us a nice house. Let me do that." And so they buy a lot in Fort Thomas, Kentucky, so another one of those little towns across from Cincinnati. And he builds this cute little bungalow, very sweet. There are actually 3 Hubbard properties, or Hubbard structures on this property. It's a very long property. This one's right in the center. We'll talk about the one that's at the very back in a little bit. And the front one is another house that he ultimately sold off from that lot. But he built this house for him and his mother to live in, and they would live there together until she died. So this house would have been a little cramped, right, for Harlan and his mom. And so they were both a little restless. They both needed to get out of the house sometimes and get a little space from each other. And they had an incredible opportunity during this period to do a lot of traveling together. They bought a little Model T Ford. And so Rose didn't drive, but Harlan did. And they had this little Model T Ford that they would putter around Kentucky. But then they started puttering farther. So they would putter up to Effingham, Illinois, near Champaign, where they would go see Rose's family. They would putter up to Chicago to see Rose's brother. And soon they were asked by Louis. We haven't talked about Louis, the middle brother, for a little bit. He's standing here in this photograph with Rose, their mother. Louis, after having a successful career as a journalist in New York, decided that it wasn't creatively fulfilling enough for him, and he wanted to start writing scripts for this newfangled thing called motion pictures. And so Louis started writing for smaller, at that time, houses in New York, like Pathé and places like that. And was seeing some success, but if you're going to hack it in Hollywood, you got to go to Hollywood. So he and his family in 1916 move out to California, and he does really well. And remember, this is not the talking era yet. This is still the silent film era. He didn't do so well after the talkies came along. It's pretty sad, but he did really well until the jazz singer. But so Louis is out in California, and he's doing so well that he's going to be on location in San Antonio filming a really complicated war scene for a movie called Wings in 1926. Wings, we just had the Academy Awards. Wings was the very first Academy Award-winning picture, and Louis was the executive producer. So if that gives you an idea of how well he was doing very well. So he asked Rose and Harlan to come out while he's on location in San Antonio, to come out and to take care of his wife and children and keep them company while he's on location. And then when he returns, Rose, of course, remember, she's very ambitious. She's very interested in the glittery things, the social things. she loves Hollywood. She thinks Hollywood is great. And so she goes to set with Louis and meets Charlie Chaplin and Gary Cooper, which is very nice. But Harlan, as you might expect, is not interested in Hollywood, thinks Hollywood stinks. So Harlan is not interested in Hollywood, and so he generally escapes out into the desert, sometimes for days on end during this period, and takes his little watercolor box with him and makes really beautiful watercolors of the surrounding landscape that's so different than the Kentucky landscape he's used to. And when they return from California, obviously Harlan doesn't want the kind of success that Louis has, but he is somewhat envious of the success that Louis has. And he wants to make his own success of the life that he wants. And so he's determined to do that, and the only way he knows he's going to be able to do that is to get out of the house from Mom. He had been not only living in that house in Fort Thomas with his mother, he had also been painting in his tiny little bedroom. So he decides during this period, those of you who have been to northern Kentucky will know it's very similar topography to here with the huge rolling hills and right along the river. And so you're seeing a nice vision of some of that area near Covington here in this first painting. He takes a couple different studios in this area out in the wilderness, still not very developed out there. Out in the wilderness where he can wander the hills, where he can experience the spirit of place, where he can really commune with nature and understand his landscape, and also get to know the people there. This is a time when he's also really getting to know and befriend lots of river dwellers who are living in this area, and there was a very thriving shantyboat community here, and he befriends lots of people in that shantyboat community, which of course will come into play in a moment. But you also see he's still experimenting crazily. These are just a few years after what I showed you earlier. So he still hasn't quite found his voice. He also has not quite found a market. He's not selling anything. And so he's genuinely supporting them working his construction work until the Great Depression hits. Now, ordinarily, you think, ooh, the Great Depression, this is going to be a sad story. Well, for Harlan and Rose, actually, the Great Depression was not so bad financially, partially because of a pilot program that was introduced by the federal government in 1934, and it was sort of the forerunner to the WPA. This was called the PWAP, the Public Works of Art Project. And it was a slightly smaller program where they were going to sort of test out what it would look like for the federal government to go into local communities, to commission local artists to create public works of art in libraries and post offices. You've seen lots of pieces from the WPA, I'm sure, in your travels in post office and libraries. And so they created a brief for artists that was called the American Scene. The American Scene, and they said, you need to be painting on this brief that is talking about how great America is, how amazing and resilient we are. Talk about our history, talk about the major white figures in our history. Very, very patriotic kind of work that we now associate with artists like Thomas Hart Benton. You'll probably know the artist Thomas Hart Benton. You'll know the artist Grant Wood. Ultimately, this style came to be known as regionalism. I love regionalism. It is a problematic thing. There's a great biography of Thomas Hart Benton that you can read that talks a lot about the complex nature of this style and what it meant socially. But if you're looking at this Thomas Hart Benton and you're looking at what Harlan Hubbard was doing, you're thinking, ooh, boy, these are not very similar, are they? They're not very similar at all. And Harlan begged the regional chairman, who actually approached him for commissions, and he was very excited about that. He begged him, let me do a steamboat mural. Let me do a riverscape. Let me do some sort of landscape. And the regional chairman said, no, you got to stick to the brief. So Harlan did 4 paintings, 2 of which went into 2 different branches of the library in northern Kentucky. And he also did this huge piece, this proscenium mural, which is in the Carnegie Library auditorium that is in Covington, Kentucky. That is still there, by the way, and it looks really good. It's been restored. But this piece, Harlan followed the brief. This is called The Spirit of Covington. And you see this sort of ethereal golden woman floating over the figures of Mary Draper Ingalls, of Daniel Boone, John G. Carlyle, Simon Kenton. These are big names in Kentucky history, and big names in American culture in general, some of them. So Harlan's following the brief. He said after this was painted, that it wouldn't, I'm paraphrasing, but he wouldn't mind if this building had collapsed into rubble. It's not that bad, but he was very ambivalent about this piece. He was very ambivalent about what this piece meant for, what was he saying to the people who were seeing this? And he wasn't saying what he wanted to be saying. He was saying what he was told to be saying. Nevertheless, he made about $660 off of this commission. $660 during the Great Depression in 1934, that's pretty good. And this was his first really big money that was thrown at his artistic career. And it gave him a little confidence, a little pep in his step, even though it wasn't quite what he wanted to be painting. It was something that did propel him to his first 2 solo exhibitions in Cincinnati, which happened in 1935 and 1936. So this was a big deal, this American scene moment for Harlan. And we're sort of approaching that late 1930s period now that I talked about at the beginning, when Harlan's really uncertain about himself, he's uncertain about his life, where it's going. He builds this studio. I mentioned there were 3 properties on that place where he built his mother's house. This is the piece that he built in the back of that property because his mother, Rose, was growing more infirm. And she really didn't need Harlan traipsing out on the hillsides. She needed Harlan at home to help care for her. And so she said, I need you closer to home. He took that very literally. This is that house that I showed you the picture of in 1923, and here's his studio. But this beautiful studio he built in 1938. What I'll tell you about this studio, this is on the Historic Registry. It's an amazing piece, one of my favorite buildings in Kentucky. Very, very clever. It's using a lot of features of the German vernacular architecture that's very common in the hillsides in northern Kentucky, where they're building directly into the hillside. You see how he's built that foundation right into this steep hill. That's sort of created a cold cellar underneath, really using space cleverly. But this is also built out of recycled and salvaged materials. It's mixing lots of different materials. You can see there's timbers in there, there's stone, there's brick. There's even a little turtle shell up at the top, which is very sweet. But it's very whimsical and it's very sustainable. So already he's starting to work in the language that he'll be working in his most famous structure, which I'll show you in a moment. So I said that this was this point in the late 1930s when he's saying, what great event in my life am I waiting for? In the late 1930s, he meets this woman. Her name is Anna Eichenhout. And this woman in the picture, that's his mother in that sketch there, which we'll get to in a second. Listen, it's Freudian, don't worry. Anna, sweet Anna Eichenhout, her name is Anna Wonder Eichenhout, just a beautiful name. Anna was a librarian at the famous Fine Arts Library, Old Fine Arts Library in Cincinnati. So Harlan was there a lot because he was doing research for his paintings, he was taking out poetry books, he also played the violin and the viola, so we would go and check out music. And when Anna, who was seeing him very regularly, and they were sort of bonding very politely over these different different interests. When she hears that he plays music, she says, "Well, I am a trained pianist and cellist. We should play music together." Mm. And in fact, their first true date that was actually romantic was to the Art Academy of Cincinnati to go see an exhibition, which is very nice. But the first time they are actually alone together, they play music. They play a beautiful César Franck piano trio that is just absolutely gorgeous, very romantic. So they start this courtship, which of course, as you're probably guessing, is pretty tough on Mama Rose, right? So Mama Rose is, she's ill now. She really needs Harlan now. So you feel for her, but she's also slipping into dementia, and so she's having a lot of trouble regulating her emotions related to Anna. Anna does end up nursing her during this period a lot with Harlan. She takes a lot of abuse from Rose during this period. But despite that, in April of 1923, Harlan and Anna decide they're going to get married. And so they elope to Maysville, Kentucky. If you've ever been to Maysville, that's the home of Rosemary Clooney. So they elope to Maysville, Kentucky. Have a very simple ceremony. And when they return, instead of living in Rose's house, they live in this little studio. Now, this is a tiny little building. I don't know if you can tell how tiny this is, but this is about a 6x8, room that's there on the main floor. So they're already starting to experiment with this idea that's been bopping around in Harlan's mind since he read Walden, which is simplify, simplify, simplify. Live with less. So they start living there. Rose dies a few months after they're married. This, of course, is a very complicated moment for Harlan because, of course, he's cared for his mother for almost his entire adult life. He's cared for her almost solely for the last 20 years. But this is also suddenly the first time that he's free to make his own choices. And he's free to make his own choices with this woman by his side who is absolutely catalyzing the next half of his life. What great event in my life was I waiting for? I was waiting for Anna to come and catalyze things for me. And what that ended up being is this remarkable second act that Harlan and Anna have together. And I will note, Harlan Hubbard has written 2 great books. We'll talk a little bit about them, but I'm not going to go into immense detail about these periods because Harlan has written so beautifully about the shanty boat years and their Payne Hollow years. But I'll touch on them and give you some information that hopefully makes you check that out from the library and give it a read. But this first adventure that they go on is, remember those shanty boats I showed you in the beginning? Shanty boat culture was basically dying out at this point. This is the 1940s, 1943, 1944. Shanty boat culture is dying out on the Ohio for lots of different reasons, on American rivers all over the United States. But it's dying out for lots of reasons, mainly because of social pressure to push what were seen as vagrants off, undesirables, off of the rivers. Harlan and Anna were unusual as shanty boaters because they were shanty boaters by choice. Most people who were shanty boaters by circumstance. They were not shanty boaters by choice. They were pushed there by social prejudice, by cultural prejudice, by poverty, by injury, by all kinds of things that would make it hard for them to pay taxes. And that was the cool thing about shanty boats, even though the governments tried to do a lot to mitigate this. If you were floating, you weren't paying taxes, which was great. But Harlan and Anna thought that the shanty boat ethos, this idea of living in this very free way, untrammeled, on the river, moving at your whim, not tied to a specific place, that this was the American experience. This was what they wanted. This was what they loved. And so they decided to build a shanty boat. And Anna is the one who says, Harlan, we're going to do this. Let's do this. You talk about shanty boats all the time. Let's do it. And so they build their shanty boat. These are images of the shanty boat in construction. This is the very, very rough camp that they had on the riverbank. They lived on the riverbank while they were building the shanty boat. So for several months, they lived on the rocky bank of the Ohio River while they're building this. Eventually, their boat ended up looking like this, beautiful, with huge wide windows, which were very unusual for shanty boats. But they had huge wide windows so Harlan could see out and paint from the shanty boat. But they build their shanty boat, and they end up living there on the shore at that shanty boat community I mentioned earlier called Brent. It was one of the few remaining shanty boat communities on the Ohio. And they wanted to build their boat there because they were going to need a lot of advice, a lot of help on how to make this kind of life work. Because what they wanted to do is ultimately they wanted to drift down the Ohio River and the Mississippi River all the way to the Gulf. And they wanted to do this in a motorless vessel. And in order to do that, you have to really know the river. And you have to really understand the currents and understand the way that the river works. What it does, and what it did for them, is gave them this incredible window into what it was like to live in Congress with this river that had defined so much of their lives. So what they ended up doing is they lived at Brent for 2 years, and then they said, time to drift. And what they would do is during high water season, when the water's moving fast, right? If you have no motor, that's the time to get where you want to go. So during high water season, so around this time of year, they're rocking and rolling to their next location on the Ohio and later on the Mississippi. And then during low water season, they would pause. They would find a place. They would find a landowner who would allow them to tie up their boat or put it in dry dock up on the shore. They would plant a garden. They would harvest that garden. They would can all of their reserves and all of the fish that they caught. And then all of that would be their preservations for their next winter of drifting. And it had this wonderful rhythm that was all about working in tandem with the river, what the river was giving, and what the river did. It was very natural. And all of this is eventually cataloged in Harlan's first book. He always dreamed of maybe doing some sort of writing. He was a very bad poet. He was a very bad poet. God love him. But he was great at prose. So he had tried poetry in his journals for many, many years, but ultimately he writes this wonderful adventure book, originally called Driftwood, remember, called Shanty Boat. He does all of the illustrations. He does this incredible first edition book jacket, which is very rare to be able to find one with this. But he does all of the hand-drawn illustrations, and this allows him and Anna the security to, after they make this incredible adventure, so 9 years after they're married, they find themselves in New Orleans and the Intercoastal Waterway. The first 9 years of their marriage, they were itinerant. They were traveling for an entire 9 years. They decided in 1952 that it was time to set down some roots. And so they started thinking where they wanted to return, where they wanted to build their shanty on land. That's what they liked to think of this home that they wanted to build for themselves. And they thought of this wonderful little place where they had actually spent that first shanty boat summer, where they tied up and planted their garden. And it was this little place a few miles downriver from Madison, Indiana, so right there in between Cincinnati and Louisville. And it was a place called Payne's Landing. And Payne's Landing, ultimately they ended up calling it Payne Hollow, would be their home for the rest of their life. Payne Hollow, we have this beautiful watercolor from Harlan here that shows the view from Payne Hollow upriver toward Madison. But they initially built a cabin that was not much larger than their shanty boat, certainly not much larger than their little studio in Fort Thomas that they were living in. That eventually developed into this homestead here in Payne Hollow. And you're probably noticing, ooh-wee, that's a steep incline right there. This is a literal hollow, so it is very, very steep. There's about a 500-foot elevation change from the uplands to the river. And they built this homestead, and you're probably noticing maybe some aesthetic similarities to that Fort Thomas studio, that art studio he built behind his mother's house. A huge window built into the hillside. This place, Payne Hollow, they lived there without electricity. They lived there without running water. They grew almost all of their food. What they couldn't buy, they bartered for. They raised goats. They made their own cheese. Everything. They foraged for local foods. They had some very obliging dogs who would occasionally kill groundhogs. I don't know if you've ever had a groundhog in your garden, but woo, it's a problem if you depend on that food. Would kill groundhogs, and Anna became very adept at making excellent dishes made from groundhog. I don't know. And then, of course, Harlan also, you see that second building there on the hillside. First I'm going to talk about the first building. So you remember that little cabin. They expanded it, partially because they were getting a lot of visitors who wanted to come and see this crazy life that these two people were building. Here's a great picture of them right by the river there at Payne Hollow. But remember, they were also musicians, they were artists, they were avid readers, so they also wanted to have the beauty in this sustainable life. Part of that was, you saw that elevation change, and you're also seeing this Steinway baby grand piano. Two pianos went down into the hollow at two different times, but you can imagine those big windows thrown open, Harlan out in the garden, Anna at her Steinway baby grand playing Bach, it just lilting out over the garden and toward the river. They were trying to integrate this beauty that they had been, that they had bonded over, that they loved, into this very rugged life, right? This very rugged and sustainable life. Harlan, of course, was continuing to do this by painting. That second structure that you were seeing on the hill is this. This is the back side of it, and this is this window here. That's Harlan's art studio at Payne Hollow. Very simple, very rudimentary, but very effective. He had one of his most explosive periods during this time. So during the late 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, Harlan was churning out incredible artwork that was starting to really coalesce into a very recognizable style. What you're looking at here on the screen, has anybody been to Owensboro, Kentucky before? Okay. So these are in the Owensboro Museum of Fine Art. This is a series of 5 paintings, actually, that tell the river history of Owensboro in paint. These are like 5 by 8. They're enormous paintings. But they have this very signature style. You see these sort of black outlines that he's doing around, and he obviously very adept at painting water so beautifully. But he's really coming into his own as an artist during this time. He's also writing another book. Bless him. So we get his second masterpiece, very different from Shanty Boat, but equally worth the read, especially worth the read if you're interested in gardening, if you're interested in the seasons and the way that affects the earth. If you're interested in Thoreau and Walden, this is the book for you. And this is all about his and Anna's life, what they call on the fringe of society. So I mentioned that they were getting a lot of curious visitors. They did live in this sort of isolated place, but people were so inspired by this life they had created for themselves that they were getting visitors all the time who were curious about this life. Ultimately, that led to him writing this book, Pain Hollow, to get more information out there to people about how they could integrate these kinds of ideas. But it's all about living with the seasons, living closer to the earth, growing your own food, trying to limit the burden that you put on the earth and the environment. Obviously, all of this is very important for us now in our current state of ecological and environmental collapse. This is a very prescient read. Harlan Hubbard was also very close friends with Wendell Berry. I'm sure many of you have read Wendell Berry's work. Wendell Berry actually was very annoyed at Harlan a lot because he was very apolitical. Wendell wanted him to be very outspoken about his views. And Harlan said, "My life is my protest. My life is my protest." So very interesting to read this book. Harlan and Anna lived in this place into their 80s. You can imagine the kind of strength it would take for someone in their 30s to live in a place like this. Just the Herculean amount of wood chopping that has to happen in order to cook and keep a house warm in winter is staggering. And so to be doing that with no electricity, no running water, just wild. They managed to do this into their 80s. Harlan lives a little longer than Anna. Anna dies in 1986. Harlan dies in 1988. And in fact, they're still there. They were cremated and they were buried underneath this very unobtrusive gravestone that has the frontispiece to Pain Hollow, which is a lovely heart with Anna and Harlan in it that their friend carved for them. So they're still there in this beloved place. This is what it looks like today. Here's Pain Hollow today. And I wanted to talk with you just a little bit here at the end about Pain Hollow today because in 1988, when Harlan died, he willed the property to another artist from Madison named Paul Hassfurter. Paul Hassfurter cared for this place until 2022 when he was too ill to continue living there. And I helped found a nonprofit that purchased this land and has since then been restoring these buildings, been restoring the land, and making it an environmental and cultural hub for the region along the Ohio River, where there can be environmental research, where there can be environmental, site-specific artwork, where we're hoping to institute artist in residencies, writer in residencies, musician in residencies. It's an amazing place. And I told you I would come back to this painting because what you were just looking at, Pain Hollow, remember I said I felt really drawn into this painting? And I just sort of had this mystical connection with this painting. Well, that's because right smack dab at the center of this view from Hanover College, this is where Pain Hollow is. That's where Harlan and Anna settled. And it still gives me chills every once in a while thinking about the fact that even before I knew this story, before it changed my life, before it changed my career, I was staring at Pain Hollow and feeling drawn to it, like it has drawn so many people. So I'm really grateful to you all for your attention. I just want to mention a few things. Pain Hollow on the Ohio is that organization that is preserving Pain Hollow right now. If you want to learn more about the work we're doing, there is a QR code up here where you can join our mailing list. I do the newsletters, so I swear you'll get one. And so you can join our mailing list and find out about what's going on. I also have a website, which is driftwoodharlanhubbard.com. Where you can check out other speaking engagements. There are exhibits related to Harlan that are traveling around Kentucky right now, if you make it out to Kentucky. And I also want to note that in October 9th through 11th, we're holding our inaugural Payne Hollow Symposium, which will be happening at Hanover College, actually. But we'll also have tours of Payne Hollow, and we'll have lots of events, including the dedication of a historic marker to Payne Hollow, which will be happening during that symposium. So if you wanted to see Payne Hollow and you wanted to learn more about Harlan, that's a great place to do it with like-minded people. So thank you so much, and I do have books available if you're interested. I'd be happy to take any questions if there are questions.
Yes, I'll take the mic around. That's how everybody hears that's listening online.
Excellent.
And also the books are $40?
Yeah, books are
Okay,
$40.
books are $40,
And I can
okay.
take cash or card.
And you guys know the drill.
Do you have photos through the book?
Yes, there are photos. There are color photos in the book, as well as black and white. And many of the images that you've seen in this are in the book.
I hope your book is as interesting as you have been today.
Well, thank you. That's very kind.
Excuse me? Oh, you don't have to stand up.
I'd like to introduce Rehoboth Yassini Fard, Dr. Yassini's nephew,
Oh, wonderful.
author of The Accidental Network that'll be coming here soon.
Oh, great.
It'll be in the library if you're a computer whiz. It's a great book to read.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Anybody else have a question for Jessica?
I think Susan has one up here.
Somebody up front? I see you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind.
Here, use the mic, please. Thank you.
Don't you all wish that Jess would have dug a little deeper into his history? This gal is brilliant. And I'll tell you one other thing. Hey, Jess, where was your first job?
Susan gave me my first job
She
at
was
Later
a
Alligator.
server.
Go get some tomato basil soup.
All right, any other questions or comments for Jessica? Okay, hold on one moment, please.
Jess, how long did it take you to do all the research and actually write the book, beginning to end?
Okay, so I graduated from college, from Hanover, Indiana, from Hanover College in 2011, and my culminating senior thesis there was on Harlan Hubbard. And since 2011, he's lived rent-free up here, and since then I've done lots of different projects related to him. So my day job is as a curator, so most of the work that I do is related to museums and exhibits, so I love writing, but a lot of the work that I've done is making this writing accessible to the community through exhibits. And of course, there's so much great artwork to see and so many amazing photos. And so I have curated over the years many different exhibits related to Harlan Hubbard through that process, doing lots of research. And basically, this is about 10, 11 years of work. I was very glad to get out into the world because these people at this table here had to hear me talk about this for 10 years. So Bless them too.
Okay, for those of you who don't know, the reason why the mic is important is because we record these so people can watch them later. And if you don't speak into the mic, the folks that watch them later can't hear, and the folks that are watching the streaming video now also can't hear the questions. So we want all that good stuff on the recording. So that's why the mic is important, just so you know. Anybody else? We can do like one more question. Anybody have a question? Okay.
I would love to see an exhibit of Harlan Hubbard's work in Wheeling, so is that a possibility?
If you find a venue, let's talk. Yeah, let's talk.
Yeah, we have some venues.
I would love to see that too, especially because, you know, as you can see, this is dealing with broader themes than just Kentucky history, right? This is dealing with sustainability. It's dealing with the environment. It's dealing with landscape art. It's dealing with, you know, authors. And yeah, I think it would speak pretty much anywhere it is. And it's my goal to get this, you know, out to lots more people than just the folks in Kentucky. So I'd love that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else have one last question? We can do one more. Anybody?
Oh.
I know that you are also an artist. Have you seen your own artistic practice kind of shaped by the time you've spent with Harlan Hubbard and Anna?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've done a lot of, it's very much a side gig for me, a side project. My most recent work has been in quilting and fiber art, and a lot of it has been very river themed. Lots of shanty boats and fish, and even the occasional beaver are popping up in the work a lot. But you know, very very landscape and ecology focused, but also very river focused, and that's just because I'm thinking about the river all the time. I've also only for 6 months of my life have I not lived on the Ohio River. I was born in Philadelphia, and we moved here when I was 6 months old, and since then I moved downriver from Wheeling to Hanover, and from Hanover to Louisville, and now to New Albany. So, you know, the river's just in me, just like it was in Harlan, and I think a lot of us who have lived along the Ohio River feel that special connection to that landscape. Thank you all so much. I really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Jessica.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming.